So one day, two cherry trees were planted in a garden. And sometime later, on the very same day, those cherry trees sprouted. And when they put out their first leaves, they started to look around. And when their eyes met, it was love at first sight. And so time passed, and the two cherry trees grew, and they became two beautiful cherry trees that in spring covered with lots and lots of pink flowers, while in summer they were loaded with the big and juicy red cherries that were even sweeter because each of them hid in itself a drop of that love. But unfortunately, the two cherry trees seem destined to love each other, but to be separate one from the other, because they end up being planted very far away one from the other, but far enough for them being unable to touch. And so one day, a little cloud that often stopped over the garden and often watched those lovers exchange and look so full of love and passion that she decided that she had to do something. She had to make something so that the two cherry trees could touch at least just once. And so she started to shake and to blow. And she even cried to try and make the leaves of the cherry trees move so that maybe they got a bit closer. But her efforts were useless because indeed the leaves of the two cherry trees moved a little and maybe they got a bit closer, but not enough for them to touch. And so the little cloud thought to ask for help to the wind. And the wind started to blow so heavily that it caused a big storm that shook the two cherry trees from one side to the other. And as they bent to one side, they got a little bit closer, but not enough for them to touch. And so the wind thought to ask for help to the big mountain. And so the big mountain shrugged its shoulders and caused a terrible earthquake that lifted and turned the earth at the foot of the two cherry trees. So the two cherry trees bent one towards the other. And this time they got really close, but not enough for them to touch. And so for the rest of the days, the little cloud, the wind, and the big mountain mourned and cried for those two lovers that loved each other so much but couldn't touch. But what they didn't know was that deep down into the ground, where nobody could see them, the roots of those cherry trees had been tied and hugging since the very first day.
Oh, that's lovely.
I love short stories, and this one is a Zen one because that's my go-to for all when somebody tells me to tell you a little tiny story.
Yeah.
So this one is about I was researching it some time ago and I really enjoy it. So here goes. So one day there was an earthquake and it shook the Zen temple to everybody, everything. The entire temple began to collapse. And there were the people in the temple had to really work hard when it finally, stopped shaking. When the earth stopped shaking, they were terrified. And when it finally stopped, the Zen master who had been hiding, with all of the students, puffed himself up and he said, now you have the opportunity to see how a Zen master must behave in a crisis. You may have noticed that I did not panic. I was scared and I was very aware of what was happening, but I did not allow my emotion to rule me. You saw that I led you all calmly into the kitchen. And then you obviously know that it was the strongest part of the temple. And some parts of everything collapsed, but the kitchen was quite safe. And you see, it was a good decision because I kept my head and we have all survived. And despite my self-control and composure, you will see that I was still a little bit tense. You might have noticed if you were observant, like you should have been. that I drank a large glass of water, something I would never do under ordinary circumstances. I would take sips of warm tea. And one of his students smiled, but they didn't say anything. Boy, what are you laughing about? Said the teacher. Master, that wasn't water. It was a large glass of soy sauce.
Yeah.
It's a very short story. Uh, a tribe of people was moving through the desert. They were moving during the night because it was too hot in the daytime to move. And it was a great advantage that there was no sun. But there was always a great disadvantage. They couldn't see any. It was really dark in the desert. There was no moon and no stars. So they definitely couldn't see where they step. So they moved very, very slowly. Suddenly, they started stumbling over some pebbles. And there was a voice from the sky saying, "If you take any, you will regret. But if you don't take any, you will also regret." So people really didn't know what to do. Take this pebble, throw them away. They really had no idea what to do. So some of them took some pebbles, some of them took one, some of them took two, some of them just threw these pebbles away. And when the sun rose, people saw in the daylight that these pebbles were diamonds. And of course, those who didn't take any, who hadn't taken any, really regretted. But those who had taken some also regretted that they hadn't taken more. That's it.
Mm.
Okay, so this story I read it long back, but I haven't told it many times. Just yesterday I told it for the first time, and today I'm telling it for the second time. But I loved it, so I hope you'll also enjoy it. Um, Finding the perfect partner, the person, the dream partner, it's difficult. It's a Herculean task, and you really, really need to be good looking, have a great salary, and be rich. And Mr. Yogi was having a lot of problems. Firstly, he was not good looking, meager salary, balding a little bit. I'm sure Roger would agree to that. It was all acting against his his prospects, and he was getting rejections after rejections after rejections. After losing almost all hopes, one day as he was walking into the market, his eyes met hers. And as they looked at each other, sparks flew. Violins started playing. There were gods, literally gods from the heavens, dropping those petals of flowers on them. And yes, it was love at first sight, and they decided to get married. But in India, two people deciding to get married is not enough. You need the blessings of your parents. And so, Mr. Yogi decided that yes, he has to go to that girl's home. And she was a rich girl, she lived in a mansion. So impressing her parents was not an easy task, but he was ready. He was dressed up nicely in a suit, and as he walked up into the mansion, he was revising everything that he had in his mind. The beautiful salutations that he would do, and some kind of small jokes that he can. Crack when things get a little bit awkward. So he was all set, and as he was sitting on the fine leather couch talking about all the pleasant things in life, suddenly it happened. Something that he didn't want to. His nose. His awful nose wanted that time to drip. And as it was about to drip, his confidence, his esteem, his respect was also. He remembered his mother. He remembered his mother always reminding him to take that handkerchief, but that precious handkerchief every time he would forget, and today also he did. But then he remembered one more saying of his mother, which was, you know, you have something a lot, but you use it the least. Do use it when you are in trouble. And immediately, frantically, he looked around and he said, you know that painting of yours? It should come there. Heaving a big sigh of relief, he said namaste and he was happily married to the dream girl. And as on his wedding day he was folding the handkerchief, he smiled to himself. Thank you.
Here is a very quick Nasruddin story. Nasruddin is always my go-to guy for a short story. And in this one, Nasruddin, the mullah, is ended up running a restaurant. Somewhere on the far-flung corner of Turkey. And one day into the restaurant comes the Sultan himself. Oh my goodness me. And Nasruddin goes up, greets His Excellency, and the Sultan says, well, what do you recommend? What is your speciality? And Nasruddin says, oh, sir, you should have the goat kebab curry. It's wonderful. And the Sultan says, I will. And he has it, and it's delicious. And he says, well done, very good. How much is that? And Nasruddin says, oh, that'll be 1,000 lira. And the Sultan is shocked. 1,000 lira? 1,000 lira for a goat kebab curry, he said. Are goats so rare around here that the meal must be so expensive? And Nasruddin looked at him and said, oh no, Sultan, it's not goats that are rare around here, it's sultans.